Yeah, so the one-point perspective for me really just refers back to landscape and my trying to work through my attraction to landscape. And so it really is just a very methodical kind of measuring of it and you know, dividing it up into the sky, the ground, the horizon, and me as a person looking out into that. And yeah, and so that I think comes from growing up on the prairies and really seeing that very simple view of big blue sky, very, very flat horizon off way in the distance, and even seeing fields that are really kind of mechanically planted, and yeah, it does really hark back to views from my childhood. I think that mathematics and patterning play a really big part of my work. I grew up in school having math as my strongest subject, and just really liked how reliable it was. I could kind of understand a system or a problem and then work through it to its logical end. And patterns then are kind of the result of a visual mathematics. So geometry is I feel the most visual part of math, and yeah, it relates to numbers and to logic in a way that you don't really need words for, or you can really just draw it out, and you don't need to work through it verbally, or yeah, there's just a certain logic to it that I really like. I guess planes are just kind of like a symbol for me, or an idea that a surface can go on forever in one direction or the other, and that on that surface can be a pattern, or it can be, you know, a line or anything, but on a two-dimensional scale, it just can go on to the infinite. And yet our view of it is usually just a little window on it, and we put an edge around it, and we put a frame on it, and yet we know that planes can kind of continue on. Art for me, or the work that I do, really becomes this in-between area where people can recognize symbols, and they can recognize imagery that makes them think back to places they've been, or experiences they've had in the real world. And so it's this kind of mediating between our memory of a place or our experience of a certain space. I use symbols in my work and try and create a symbolic language that is more universal than personal. And I like to borrow from science and math and kind of appropriate that imagery, because I find that it's a really good way to communicate without the use of words. So, sky is a huge symbol in my work, I think, and it's kind of the most visible symbol of space that we have. And even though there's, you know, technically not much there to see, we do associate clouds and blue and moving air and wind. So it's what we have, a visual representation of space, basically, of infinite air, or infinite whatever there is that we have. And so yeah, as a visual image, it kind of holds a lot of weight for me, and kind of also represents for me infinity and what our place within it, and how we kind of navigate within our understanding and our comfort of it. Yeah, I find printmaking to be really multifaceted, and really can serve the needs of artists, a lot of different artists, whether you're, you know, obsessive compulsive and want to draw little tiny marks, or you want to be big and messy, or you want to, you know, make one really small precious work, or you want to kind of explore and experiment. So for me, what I have found to be useful is just the material use. Like, the material for me is really intriguing. And the idea that you can explore, so you can experiment a little bit, and then the material will kind of tell you where to go next. For the work I did titled Ocean Fathoms, I was scanning old atlases at really high resolution and finding out what kind of print process was used through looking really close at it. So, you know, old offset litho and even screen. So pulling out the halftone pattern and pulling out whatever kind of method was used. And so in that way, looking at the history of print and more commercial print, but still, you know, has a certain quality and a place in history, and then bringing that information into the digital era where I can blow it up and print it really high resolution. And so, yeah, that's just a really good example of how printmaking can be available for what you want it to be. And usually my imagery goes through the computer, whether I'm scanning negatives of film, or I'm scanning drawings, or, you know, pulling pictures off the internet, or yeah, but it's a good way to really manipulate your original image and figure out how exactly you want your print to look. And I was looking at old atlases and looking specifically at the pattern that was created from the print process. So, so often in commercial printing, the use of half-tone dots or small, very horizontal lines to kind of create different tones in the image. And so I was scanning those images at really high resolution and accentuating that print process. So pulling out the lines and seeing what was actually there. And then as I went, you know, got closer and closer to the image, kind of realized that it was reminding me of another image. So it reminded me of a map. So I took about a square centimeter of an atlas, blew it up, and then, you know, it looks like a whole nother map, a whole nother world within that tiny little area, and then proceeded to print that with offset litho. So probably the same process that the original atlas was printed in. So it's kind of this going back and forth between, you know, exploring a certain method, doing it a bit myself, seeing what's there, and just trying to find my own way through it and pull out pieces that I really find are significant, and then trying to connect the dots in a certain way.